So firstly, a very warm welcome to our Business Showcase interviews. My name's Ron Maycock and I'm the owner of Action Coach Castleford and also of Business Performance UK. I'm delighted to be joined today by Paul Macdonald, who is co-founder of Real Times Network. Paul, very good morning.
Good morning, Ron. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, very good. We'll be hearing a lot more from Paul in a few moments. Before that, I just wanted to explain the purpose of these interviews. We're surrounded by some amazing ideas and amazing businesses in the UK. Each of them has their own story to tell. And these interviews help us share their journeys, showcase their achievements, and ultimately maximize their exposure, all in the name of abundance and for the benefit of businesses across the UK and, as I'm sure we'll hear a little bit later on, across the world potentially as well. So without further ado, Paul, tell me a little bit more about Real Times Network.
So Real Times was only founded last year, but it's an amalgamation of two businesses that were formed in 2017. And my background comes originally from the accountancy scene. I have a degree in accountancy and I worked for one of the big four companies for a while before taking a complete career right turn, going into media and content around about 2010. And I was brought to Leeds by Perform Media, who moved their offices from London up to Leeds in 2013. I moved up from London, where I was living at the time, to Leeds then, and I've been here ever since. And I worked for Perform Media for another 4 or 5 years until I had the opportunity to form the original embryonic stages of Real Times Network with some Dutch colleagues that I had met during the process of working with Perform. And in the beginning, we just looked at what we thought could be gaps in the market from a content perspective. So originally, we looked at Formula One, predominantly because it was a sport that had been undervalued in terms of its social output, predominantly because of the old ownership, which was Bernie Ecclestone. But in 2017, it was bought over by a new company from the US, Liberty Media, and their focus was a lot more on the kind of social aspect of the sport, which is growing exponentially. And, you know, things like Drive to Survive on Netflix have all played a key part of that. So my business partners are Dutch, and Max Verstappen was a developing driver at that point. And we decided to launch a website called GP Fans in Dutch to piggyback off his success in the original stages of his career. And obviously that's been massively successful since he's now a two-time world champion. And we've also obviously got a massive English language interest in the sport across the world in key markets, US, UK, Canada, Australia. And then we decided to kind of expand our network to cover other drivers and other languages. So we have Latin American Spanish content, which covers predominantly Checo Perez, who is Max Verstappen's partner at Red Bull. And we have French language output as well to cover kind of French-Canadian stuff, but also races in France and Monaco. So we have a multi-language network of websites which operates in Formula One. As alongside that, we've got football content or soccer content based, some of it based entirely in the Netherlands, but others are international. Our website, Football Transfers, is in collaboration with a Dutch agency called Sci Sports, who work directly with the clubs and organisations on the data side of things and analytics. But we work with that data on a consumer D2C platform and work out algorithms and content that's kind of unique to the transfer market space. And that website's been going for about just over 2 years now, and we've got that in 3 languages, again, Dutch and English and also Latin American Spanish. And the intention is to kind of grow out that network over the next few years. We've also got various other kind of social-led initiatives, predominantly in the Dutch market. And yeah, we're always on the lookout from a biz dev perspective to see what the next thing we can either invest some money in and get involved in, or start from scratch ourselves and grow over time. So yeah, we're mainly in the media space, but not attached directly to website content. We've got large social media platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, everything, Instagram, everything's covered from a written content perspective, also from an audio perspective, and very much from a video perspective. So we see ourselves as a multi-language, multimedia company at the moment.
So, and all of this, in my understanding, almost came from almost like an international fan zone model of just supporting information and presenting it to the people that showed an interest in that particular geocentric area or wider across the whole sport. Now it sounds like it's becoming a lot more than that, I guess. So and what's the main sort of commercialization model within this? So is it based on advertising? Are you having a subscription model that people have to subscribe? How's this turn into a business from information on websites?
Sure. So the main driver is programmatic revenue at the moment, but we are acutely aware that we need to diversify our revenue streams. So we have very solid betting relationships, particularly in the Dutch market. The Dutch betting market opened for the first time October 2021, I believe. It had been a closed market before that. There had been a grey area operating there, but then the Dutch authorities decided to close down the grey area and legalise betting in the country. So we have, obviously, with sports websites, we have the ability to access user interest there and try and drive revenue for bookmakers. So that's one key source for us. And we also have branded content relationships in some of our bigger brands as well, which we do video content around, and also do branded content relationship deals on our owned and operated platforms as well. So subscription model isn't something we've looked at yet, but it is something that's on the agenda for us. But it's just a matter of figuring out how and why and when you can do that content these days to make people pay for it. I think that's a real challenge in the subscription model. People just don't like to pay for things every now and again. So it's a matter of trying to drive interest in something that you're doing that's just so unique that can make someone keep coming back month on month to pay for it. But that's certainly on the agenda for something for us to look at in the next 12 to 18 months. And
with the content, let's take the Formula One. When you mentioned about supporting information about Verstappen and other drivers internationally, are you looking to engage or to an extent almost have their permission to access us? Is this almost like an official thing? Are you having to go through the teams or the individuals for this, or is this just, hey, look, we're just finding sources of information from anywhere and everywhere and amalgamating it into one site where people can access that information?
No, so like my background is very much based in the journalistic side of things. So I like to have relationships with the governing bodies to try and do things the right way. We will probably almost certainly be at 90%, if not all of the Formula One races this year as an accredited source. And from a football perspective, we have our own journalists who try and garner exclusive content, particularly around the transfer market. So as much as there is this space for kind of UGC, user-generated content, which I think absolutely has a space in the market, I still do believe that there is a space for authority around content and having knowledge and access to places where the common fan just isn't able to go. And I think that's an important thing too. So as much as we like to try and balance the social side of sport, I think there is as much of an interest in what either Max Verstappen or Lionel Messi is doing off the pitch these days as there is what they're doing on it. And we have to cater for that audience too. I do think that having a level of authority around what you do and having a level of respect amongst your peers, but also amongst a broader audience, is very important as well in terms of getting people to come back to you and recognising you as a good, reliable source of content. That's something that's very important to us as a business as well.
I think that credibility goes an awful long way. The moment that it just becomes opinionated, you're opening up the doors for everything that goes on in social media where people inadvertently post their own opinion and it comes back and bites them right royally. It's a business at the end of the day. You can't even just claim, oh, well, that's just my opinion. The moment it goes into official press and it's published, you better own that opinion and or be aware of the consequences, I guess. So it all started around the Formula One sector. So what's happening next in the Formula One world?
So the Formula One world is expanding and hopefully trying to grow its US-based audience, which could be something that's very lucrative for us. We are trying to break out our English language content to a US and a UK audience, so having two different versions of the website. I think that The big difference is that the UK audience is very knowledgeable about the sport and has followed the sport for a long time. So you almost have to cater your content slightly differently for that level of sophistication. Whereas the US audience, not through any fault of their own, but there are other multiple motorsports in the US, IndyCar, NASCAR obviously being a massive one, that Formula One has struggled to gain like kind of mainstream traction in that space. And the current owners of Formula One are very much looking to change that. They've added three races, unprecedented 3 American races to the calendar next year, including one in Las Vegas and one in Miami. So they're making real commercial plays to grow the audience as much as possible in that huge market. And I think that's something that we're going to try and target as well in terms of making our audience in the US more accessible to the content that we are producing. So that's a major factor for us. And also, we want to try and grow our offering into as many languages as possible. It's always been my intention to do so. I formerly used to run elements of goal.com, which at one point was the biggest football website in the world. And our modus operandi was always that we had a network of editions working together in different languages to provide content for the entire network. And at one point we had 36 different editions on Go, and that was covering 14, 15 different languages. And I really don't see any reason why within key markets that Formula One has a massive interest, we couldn't look to expand our offerings into those markets going forward, whether that be Germany, for example, Italy, 2 massive Formula One markets there, and passionate fans of the sport. But it's just about getting yourselves to that level where you have an underlying level of traffic and, of course, revenue for the markets you've already got before you can start to look at the next one that you go into. So that's something that's very much on the agenda for us in the next couple of years, looking at how many markets we could feasibly manage to run a Formula One website in.
Do you see it disseminating sport by sport, or is it likely to be a geographically driven? So South America, certain sports are very popular. Obviously, the language-wise, you've got Spanish primarily and a bit of Portuguese. Do you see it going that way, or is this going to be the sport will transcend geographical barriers through the website? So you'll take it sport by sport.
I think there's 2 things you need to look at. Obviously, you need to look at key markets where you can generate the most revenue from. And if the sport is interesting and has an audience in that market, then it makes logical sense to go into that market, particularly from an eFigs perspective. But obviously, you can't let that dictate if there's no interest in the sport in that particular area. You're right, like South America, there are some sports that are interested in and they are more than others. We like for example, there's no Brazilian driver on the grid at the moment in Formula One, but there's still a massive Brazilian Portuguese audience down there. So that's a market that we could look at potentially, but only if we can properly commercialize it as well. So as much as we want to go into a market where there's a big audience, we need to look at the underlying numbers and say, can we generate enough revenue commercially from that market to make it viable for us over an extended period? So as much as I'd like to go into as many markets as possible, even ones where we know there's a big audience, there's obviously that commercialization play that we need to look at as well to make sure that it's going to clean its feet at the end of the day.
And what are the biggest barriers then to entrance for the new markets? Is it your own cash flow in terms of generating or having that safety net to be able to do it, or are there pre-existing providers of similar services through different media organisations that are pre-existing?
I think there's a couple of factors at play there. I think one of the things that kind of makes us slightly unique is that through working in the perform media business, I've established contacts in various countries across the world in various editorial languages. And I think one of the most daunting things for any operation that tries to go multi-language is finding yourself that first guy in that market that even knows what to produce, what the interest is, and how to produce a content plan around it. And I'm very fortunate to have met a lot of very talented people in various languages that allows me to get a leg up and understand that market a lot better than I do, and allow them to produce content plans and allow them to assess whether it's viable before we look at it. But from a cash flow perspective, you are right. We have got 1 or 2 operations. I mentioned football transfers is a big thing there, but that's a joint venture between the analytics agency Sci Sports and us. But we do try to keep most of our stuff in-house and pay for it via existing cash flow. So whilst we're not averse to looking at relationships and doing joint ventures, we do try and look at it from a first perspective of, can we fund this? Can we get this to a position where we are wholly owning it and paying for it and generate the revenue from it? So it's the market itself and who you know in that market that can get you the content and the access to commercialization that you need, but also how expensive is it going to be going into that market, which can sometimes be a blocker. For example, Germany at the moment, from a content perspective, is a very expensive market to produce content in. So it's all about, can we commercialize that to the level where it's going to start to pay for itself quickly, or do we need to look at maturing our audience a little bit more further down the line before we look at a market like that? So yeah, I think there's a couple of factors at play there.
Do you see the ideal model having it centralized out of the UK or some central location and having people working in hubs, or do you actually see this setting up a media and content center specifically in that particular country? Is it going to be multiple sites by the end of this, or?
I hope so. At the moment, my three co-founders are all Dutch, and we have a lovely office in East Netherlands, which at any given day there could be 30 or 40 staff working from that office. I would see the Dutch side of it as our hub, absolutely. But the way that remote working has changed over the years means that people can work from anywhere, and it's more cost effective for us as a business right now to have people working from their own spaces or their own homes. And if we do get to a size where we want to bring in full marketing teams, commercial teams, then at that point I agree we would need localized hubs. But at the moment it's working quite efficiently for us, just having that main hub in the Netherlands where I travel regularly to, and also having people working remotely across the world in other markets.
I think have passport will travel works very nicely with this. Bricks and mortar necessarily isn't going to give you quick returns unless you've got it would make sense to have a business center for South America or somewhere like that, where there is an entire market and all of your content's just going to be focused in on that. Having local people doing it absolutely makes sense. Even then it's probably going to be a hybrid model anyway, so it is what it is. So and it's obviously, from what you said, it's a relatively new venture. You've gained a lot of traction from previous connections. You've taken it to a certain point in pretty quick time. So what's next? What's the future holding for Real Times at the moment?
Well, as I said, we're always looking at language expansion for the brands that we do have, but we're also very keen to look at business development and focus on what could be next. Things like a subscription model for various types of content could be a route that we go down if we can find the right angle into that content and provide the right service for it. We have a website called Football Critic, which is predominantly based around data, which we are growing and trying to go multi-language with that, and really go for the data play on that one, whether it's people that are passionate about data analytics and that side of things, or whether people that want to use it from a betting perspective, which is obviously still a massive global market. So that's something that we're focusing on, but we're always on the lookout for just new opportunities as well. So the brands that we do have, we're trying to grow them from a language perspective, from an audience perspective, from a commercialization perspective. That's always on the agenda. But from a biz dev perspective, we're always looking at what the next thing could be that we can add on to our portfolio. And at the start of the year, we're never really sure what that is, but something always comes up mid-year, which has to get added to the budget and forms part of our overall portfolio. So at the moment, on all our languages and all our sites, we've got about 13 or 14 different websites. So that's a lot of managing from a editorial and commercial perspective. So a bit of downtime might be nice this year, just to focus on those ones rather than adding more to it. But again, you're always looking to expand your network, aren't you? So if an opportunity comes up for us, then we'll certainly look at that.
So if you could pick just one strategic alliance partner, could be from a sport, or it could be, as you say, like the betting industry or whatever, who would that be?
I'd be looking for someone potentially to either amplify our editorial content across the broader US side of the business, or even our commercial content out there. and I'm thinking I'm focusing on the Formula One side of it here primarily, but also from a football perspective, I think soccer is growing there in that market bigger than it's ever been before. There's more of an interest in the Champions League and Premier League there than there ever was before. The audience that's watching these sports is still dwarfed by the likes of the NFL, but it is growing. And to get into that audience at the ground level and try and grow with it is something that we're looking to do as well. So having a partner that allows us to amplify what we're doing across the US would be very significant for us across the longer term of the business.
I just wonder how much that might resemble a legal expert in terms of media rollouts and various different franchise models that they've got, because they tend to own their own media, don't they, within the franchise model? Yeah. So it's not without its complications, but it sounds really, really exciting in terms of a growth thing. The only advice I would give is, put in the hours now. Don't slow up. Put that off until next year or whatever it may be. But keep rolling. Keep sort of riding the roller coaster and making sure that it's happening, because there's some amazing opportunities and opportunity costs when we don't take those and we don't grasp those opportunities moving forward. So really, really interesting. And I've got to say, Paul, it's one of the most interesting interviews that I've done, because the content of what you're doing is so diverse. It's got so many different applications. It's got a couple of common themes in terms of multi-language, cross-border, and linking people with information to sports and passions that they are absolutely in love with. So it's got a massive potential, massive audience globally, and a case of watch this space, because I think the next few years are going to be very, very exciting for you. So really good. So a big thank you to Paul for sharing with us today. It's bringing us to the end of the interview. If you do want to showcase your business, as I say, it is about sharing our journeys, sharing our experiences, and making sure that people in business see the successes that are actually happening in real times. So always a good way of doing it. So once again, big thank you to Paul, and do feel free to join us for the next instalment of the Business Showcase interviews.